Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on employment post-COVID, change and opportunity. My name is Michael O'Connell. I'm chairperson of Cork City Partnership, and I will chair this morning's proceedings. Like many organisations, Cork City Partnership adopted the webinar platform during the pandemic. It has been very successful for us as a way to tell the stories of people that we have helped and to bring together top quality speakers to give insights into the areas of social inclusion in which we work. Our running order today will include a mix of speakers and pre-recorded videos followed by a panel discussion. At this stage, I would like to welcome the Deputy Lord Mayor of Cork, Councillor Damien Boylan, who will officially launch our webinar. Thank you.
Good morning all, and thank you Chairman Michael O'Connell for inviting me to launch this webinar, and to note Adrian Rogers, Director of Services for Cork City Council, and to welcome Paul Garrity, Principal Officer, Department of Rural and Community Development. It's safe to say COVID-19 has changed how we all work, and I know that Cork City Partnership was in the forefront of providing support to the vulnerable citizens in Cork directly through its SICAP programme and in collaboration with other organisations, and we think especially maybe of things like Friendly Call, which is hugely successful. This webinar is an opportunity to reflect on how we work through COVID and what the world of work may look like in the future. So we appreciate how the work of Cork City Partnership contributes to social inclusion in Cork, and I'm sure this webinar will give us all valuable insights on how to help people in employment and into the future. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy your morning. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Damien. Thanks, Deputy Lord Mayor. I know you're very busy schedule these days, so we're delighted that you took some time out to join us here this morning. Our first speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is, and I'm delighted to welcome, Principal Officer for the Social Inclusion and Communities Unit, Paul Garrity. Paul's duties include policy and oversight for a range of measures which support disadvantaged communities, including the Social Inclusion and Community Activation Programme, the Community Enhancement Programme. Paul is also responsible for managing the oversight of Pobble. You're very welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Michael, thanks very much for having me this morning. Thank you, Councillor Boylan, Brenda and team in Cork City Partnership. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, Paul Garrity here. I know I see a few familiar names in the audience already, and so for those of you who don't know me, Michael's given me a fairly good introduction there. I am a Principal Officer in the Department of Rural and Community Development with responsibility for the range of programmes that Michael mentioned: Community Development Programme, Empowering Communities Programme, Place-Based Leadership Programme, Community Enhancement Programme, Community Activities Fund, and of course SICAP, most importantly in terms of what we're talking about today. I also have the governance oversight of Pobble and some responsibilities in relation to legislation around cemeteries and dog control, but that's not, I suppose, very relevant for today's discussion. So like I say, today I have my SICAP hat on, and a look at the running order and the guest list would indicate that SICAP is something that you're all fairly familiar with. And Adele from the ISRI is going to talk a little bit later in further detail about it. In fact, Adele completed a report last year that situated SICAP very much in a unique position in the pre-employment space, and I expect she'll talk to you about that a bit later. But look, just a few headline points about the programme. We always say that SICAP is the Irish Government's primary social inclusion programme, funded by the government through ourselves and co-funded by the European Social Fund. So there'll be 43 million allocated to it next year, and over the course of the programme itself, in the last 5 years, over 250 million has been allocated to it. So it's something, I suppose, that we're very proud of. Its aim, as you know, is to reduce poverty, promote social inclusion and equality in Ireland by supporting communities and individuals using a community development approach, and that's what we strive to do. Overseen and managed at a local level by the 33 LCDCs, and I see Adrian here today, and it's good to catch up with you, Adrian. And implemented, most importantly, nationally by 46 local development companies across 51 areas. So SICAP funds staff working in these local development companies to engage with marginalised communities, and there's over 600 staff employed nationally. So I guess the best way of explaining SICAP to people who don't know anything about it is that it pays the wages of 600 people across Ireland who are there trying to help people who need help the most. And that's it at its very simplest, I suppose. And of all the jobs I've had in the civil service over the years, I've been knocking around a while. You shouldn't let these youthful looks deceive you. Of all the programs I've been involved with, this has been by far the most important. And we have a very, very serious and passionate support of Minister of State Joe O'Brien about it, and he agrees that it is also the most important program that he's ever been involved with. I think the work is vital, and most particularly over the pandemic. We know how the local development companies and all of us, I suppose, and local authorities jumped together to help those people through the pandemic that needed it most. So look, I guess we're here today in relation to employment post-COVID, but I suppose a key part of that is the help and supports that SICAP participants got through COVID to put them in a position now, hopefully we're at the far side of this, that they can begin considering their employment options. So look, the pandemic had a significant impact on everybody, of course, as we know, but a more significant impact, and Edel can speak to this a bit later, on people living in this, already coping with disadvantage. So the COVID-19 adjusted measure of employment, which counted claimants on the PUP, showed an unemployment rate of 27% in January 2021. The number of people engaged with SICAP over this period increased, and the progression rates for individuals have begun to climb towards pre-pandemic levels, which is a good sign that SICAP is playing absolutely continues to play a key role in getting people ready for participation in the employment market. By the end of 2021, I think this is a fairly staggering statistic. By the end of 2021, over 10,000 people, due to SICAP interventions, had participated in a course, an apprenticeship, or work experience. And nearly 1,500 people had progressed into employment, and 1,274 people had set up their own business. So, you know, it wasn't a case that the pandemic slowed down the companies and the local development companies and SICAP's ability to engage with people. In fact, it actually ramped up. The SICAP efforts ramped up during the pandemic, which is incredibly impressive, I suppose, when you consider everything that was happening. The majority of those jobs that I've described were obtained in the open labour market, and it's the highest rate for open market employment since the start of SICAP. So there's really great things happening out there. The support that SICAP gives to social enterprises is often overlooked, I feel. There's more than one pathway to employment, and social enterprises are really coming into their own. There was a 12% increase in 2021 on the number of social enterprises supported in 2020 via SICAP, for example, which is really, really impressive in the teeth of a pandemic. And a third of those were new registrations, brand new registrations during 2021. So that means people are pursuing, with the support of SICAP and local development companies, alternative ways into employment and into self-sustainability. So there's been steady increases in supports to new and established social enterprises year on year, which suggests that SICAP is playing a growing role in social enterprise development nationally. Now, another part of the department I work in here, we have policy responsibility for social enterprise in Ireland. And we need to begin, with your help, to tie in what's happening locally to that big national policy, because there's huge work happening. And it is one of the fastest growing sectors globally, and indeed in Ireland, the social enterprise sector. So something to keep an eye on. And so many of the success stories begin with SICAP interventions. So it's something that we don't talk enough about. Look, just a few key outputs from the SICAP program 2018 to 2021. More than 86,000 individuals were supported since 2018. Huge, huge numbers. And nearly 5,000 local community groups supported. I'm not going to go on and on. There's so many statistics I could throw at you here, and people aren't going to sort of appreciate having a load of numbers, but the numbers are staggering. And we have a job of work to do, I suppose, to tell this story. We haven't managed to crack that nut yet. So I'm asking anybody here, I suppose, today that has any interaction with SciCap and any interaction with the local development companies who provide a broad range of supports to outside of SciCap, as we know, to tell this story. Because the more we tell it and the more we generate some noise around the success, the more chance we have of achieving greater funding for the programme. So look, a couple of final points I just say to you. We're currently finalising a review of the current SciCap programme. And I know that there's been participation from the local authorities, LCDCs, and from the local development companies. And the idea is we're always trying to make this programme a little bit better. So how do we ensure that SciCap continues to do what it does in the post-COVID world, particularly creating opportunities for people to participate in democracy and in training and in employment and so on. So I'd ask you, if we do come to you with a boring looking questionnaire or a set of questions on email or something, please respond to us and please give us your ideas. I really would urge you to do that. And I thank you all of the people who have already contributed to that review. So we're designing the next iteration of SciCap 3. Two things about that: it'll be launched in January 2024. It will have more funding than any of its iterations previously, going back to, I suppose, 2008 and the crash. And I guess what we needed to do is we needed to be better than its current iteration. And if anyone has any brilliant ideas for a name, by the way, I'm not sure if the name SciCap is something that people remember or means much. If anyone has any ideas on that, please let me know, or else we'll continue with SciCap. And finally, I just want to pay tribute to Brenda, chaired by Michael, of course, Cork City Partnership, and the work particularly that they did during the pandemic. And I think Councillor Boylan mentioned the friendly call service. It's a phenomenal service. I'm sorry, maybe it was Michael who mentioned it, but either way, it was a phenomenal service, and it continues to be such an important outreach mechanism to get to people who really need that support in Cork. And it's so much more than the friendly call. Anyone who knows that service knows that one day it's a phone call, next day it's a trip for an appointment, or bringing some shopping to people, and really, really practical measures to make sure that people in Cork who are feeling isolated have some contact. So it's incredible. So there's more to SciCap and SciCap funded services than getting people ready for employment. It's such a broad program, and I want to commend Brenda, her staff, and under the oversight of Michael for all that. So look, I'm going to stop talking because I'm conscious people want to maybe say things or ask questions or something like that. So I'll hand you back to the chair, and thanks very much, Michael.
Any questions? Is there any questions for Paul? And then you can just carry on. So we move on. So thanks again, Paul, and again, thanks for your continued support. Our next item on the agenda now this morning is our first video clip, and Brenda Barry, our Social Inclusion Officer, will introduce the clip for us.
Thanks, Mick.
Chair.
Sorry, and Brenda, sorry for interrupting.
Yeah.
I think the Deputy Lord Mayor wants to come in there.
Just briefly, I do have to go. I have another job to attend to, Michael. As you know, the role of a councillor is part-time. Unfortunately, we spin plates in loads of different directions. So look, the best of luck with this morning. That was very interesting, Paul. And yeah, again, well done, Brenda, on the friendly call. I think of anything that went through COVID, I think friendly call was the one that made the biggest difference to the most amount of people. So congratulations on that again. Enjoy your morning, folks. We'll see you again really soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Damien. Thanks for that,
Thank you. So I'll just to say thank you very much to Paul and to the Lord Mayor for those kind words and friendly call. We're actually up for an award tomorrow night at the Age Friendly National Recognition Awards. So we're hoping we'll come out a winner. So that's tomorrow evening. But back to today. So just to say, we've run a number of SciCap conferences in the past few years. We did a webinar, again, engaging older people, reflections from COVID last year. In 2019, we did a conference on women's safety, which went very well. And in 2018, we did men's engagement using community development approaches. So the webinar is obviously, this is our second year hosting a webinar. because of COVID, and I suppose you can reach a bigger audience really when you're trying to run a national event. So and so this year we're about employment. As Paul said, we have experienced consistently high demand for our support services in the last few years. And the aim of our webinar today, I suppose, is to highlight good practice and to showcase the work of SICAP and Cork City Partnership. We will look at employment and the challenges and opportunities that came with COVID and the supports that we were able to offer through SICAP and to our clients in Cork City Partnership. This is a good news story and shows the adaptability of our team through COVID and the changes that we had to make. So just introducing the first video, it's my colleague, Carmen Inchman. Carmen is currently, she's our Senior Development Support Officer working on SICAP with Cork City Partnership. And she will go through her journey to her current post. She's originally from Romania, but is now definitely a proud Cork City Northsider. So if you just want to play the video, thanks. Hello, my name is Brent Barry and I'm the Social Inclusion Community Activation Programme Coordinator with Cork City Partnership. And I'm here today talking to my colleague Carmen Inchman, who came through the SICAP programme and is now working on the SICAP programme. Hi Carmen, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good. Do you want to tell me about your experiences with, I suppose, TOOS, Cork City Partnership, getting involved in SICAP?
So I started with Cork City Partnership on a TOOS program back in November 2017. While I was on TOOS, I got involved in the SICAP program, so I got support and I did some courses. I did a computer course funded by the SICAP, and I did one-to-one sessions with the employment officer in Cork City Partnership on the SICAP program.
Brilliant.
I did a one-to-one session on the CV, building my CV. I did interview skills and job preparation. At the end of my placement on TOOS, I was offered a 3-day contract on the LES,
which is
Local Employment Service.
Very good.
And later, a job became available under the SICAP program, and I left the LES and I joined the SICAP program.
Okay.
And I got the job and was a development support worker, and it was full-time, and I'm based in Churchfield in the Parochial Hall.
Brilliant.
With my job, we do help people that they're coming into the office. They always nobody will come into the office without getting supports, without getting the services. Like they come in for CVs, they come in for forms, print up the forms, help with their CVs, help with their job application. I even did apply for somebody for a visa for Australia, so we can do anything.
Yeah.
So it's great that people are getting the service.
Yeah. And even so much as setting up emails for people. I mean, a lot of people with technology and stuff. So you've come through the program, you've got the supports from SICAP, and now you're working on the program and supporting people, and you understand, obviously, I suppose, what people's needs are when they come in the door.
Yes, I do came and I did get help through the SICAP through the program, and it helped me boost my CV and my confidence. And now I'm doing the same for the clients, and
Right.
I keep telling them when they're coming into the office. And sometimes the team leaders, they have interviews in Churchfield office, and I say, listen, I started on TOOS. I'm here now, and you can be in my place anytime.
Yeah. You got the supports from SICAP and carried on through, and you're running the show.
I am, yeah.
And tell me about just a little bit about, when COVID came.
When COVID came, we were caught by surprise. We never knew what it is, what to do. Under the SICAP program, we do run short community education courses, and we have premises in Spriggs Road where we run the courses. and in every outreach offices. And when COVID came, all the courses had to stop.
Yes.
So we offered support to our SciCap clients. We offered them support to go online. We never knew about Zoom, Teams, any other social platforms, online platforms. So we had to learn ourselves and then teach the clients and give them IT support.
Absolutely, yeah. A big challenge, but you know, it's been great for some people. It's given them skills that they mightn't have got.
Yes.
Even though COVID was terrible, but it's brought new skills for people, and it's great that we were able to support people both remotely and in person. And to be fair, wasn't the office open for the whole time?
Yeah, the office was open.
Not to the public.
Not to the public. We were working, and even when we were working from home, I will still get calls from clients. Carmen, I need to update my CV. So I was just printing the CV and meet the client by SuperValu or by the office and just hand in the CV. And some of the SciCap staff took on more responsibilities when we were working from home, doing friendly call, you know, the service for the elderly and the isolated people. So we were doing calls, updating database. I was liaising with the volunteers, getting feedback, assigning calls to them, shopping, and all that.
There was a lot. There was hamper delivery, there was shopping,
We
and there
were
was
actually,
support.
we were actually working more. It wasn't like 9 to 5.
Yeah.
I was just closing my computer around 8 o'clock in the evening.
Yeah, and it was good because I suppose we were supporting people who were probably most affected by COVID, the people who were isolated and alone. A lot of the friendly call clients would have been living on their own and whatnot. So SciCap has been a positive experience.
It is a positive experience, and we do offer a lot of supports and courses, and through SciCap we do offer accredited courses too. So I encourage everyone to come in, Cork City Partnership, through all the programs, SciCap, TOOS. Like, we offer the service, local employment service. So everyone that will come in will get service.
Brilliant. That's great. And we're lucky to have you, Carmen.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks for that, Carmen. It was great to hear your story and how much you're enjoying your stay with us up in Churchfield, doing wonderful work and supporting members of the local community. We'll move on now, ladies and gentlemen, to our next speaker, and our next speaker is Dr. Adele Whelan. Adele is a Senior Research Officer in Economics and Analysis Division at the Economic and Social Research Institute. Her policy research has bridged quantitative and qualitative research methods across a number of core areas, including labour market economics, economics of education, programme evaluation, community development and social inclusion. Key studies in this area include the evaluation reports for public and pre-employment programme interventions and on community development. So thanks very much, Adele, for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. And also thanks to the Cork City Partnership for inviting me to participate in this really interesting webinar today. I'll begin by sharing some slides that will help with my presentation. Okay, so my presentation today really revolves around our evaluation in 2019 of the evaluation of the SciCap pre-employment supports. And other co-authors of this work are Judith Delaney, Seamus McGuinness and Emer Smith. And this work was funded by PUBL in connection with the DRCD. So many of you on this call are well aware of the SciCap programme. It has been spoken at length already today. So just to start by saying that it provides funding to tackle poverty, social exclusion and long-term unemployment through, as was said, local engagement and partnerships between disadvantaged individuals, community organisations and also public sector agencies. It's funded by PUBL and the Department of, administered by PUBL and funded by the Department of Rural and Community Development. For our evaluation, we specifically focused on pre-employment supports. And by that, I mean we identified individuals who were deemed to be furthest for the labour market, which are particularly important in times that we are facing now. So these are individuals who are both long-term unemployed, who have been unemployed for 2 years or more, and also have low levels of educational attainment, leaving cert or less. So these dual aspects. So at the time, there was a sharp rise in total unemployment. So that was Q1 2020, due to COVID-19 crisis. So about a third of individuals reported as unemployed during that time. And it was expected at the time that the total number of those experiencing long-term unemployment would rise into the future. But now we're in 2020 and we have seen continuing declines in the unemployment rate and higher participation rates, really contributing to a tighter labour market. So the unemployment rate at the moment is set to fall to 4.1% in this final quarter of 2022 and average about 5% over the year. So those who are remaining outside paid unemployment for longer durations, really there is a scarring effect of the pandemic on those individuals. And they're often individuals who face an array of disadvantages and really require appropriate preparation before they can be considered employment ready. There are many steps here. It's very difficult usually to source data on pre-employment interventions, and that's internationally. But Pobal really were able to provide us with very good data from their IRIS data set, so administrative data on the programme, and which allowed us to identify these participants in pre-employment who were receiving employment supports, and also a comparable control group, which allowed us to estimate a very robust counterfactual estimation. Even if we have good data available, quite often the individuals face such a complex and diverse range of needs when we talk about pre-employment. A quantitative assessment alone really isn't enough. You also need the qualitative assessment. So this was a holistic approach to evaluation. We also had a qualitative assessment included. So the methodology that we used, just to briefly introduce that, we started with a detailed profile of participants. Okay, so looking at individual characteristics, the barriers that they face to inclusion, and also spatial factors, does where individuals live, play a role. Then we moved on to the quantitative analysis. So that was the counterfactual analysis that allowed us to compare the employment outcomes of individuals receiving employment supports with a comparable control group and estimate our counterfactual. And I will present the results of that. Then we also had the qualitative analysis. So this started with a short postal email survey to all the LDCs, of which we had a really excellent response rate of 91%. So Paul earlier on was asking for people to respond to the surveys. We were very impressed with this. It's probably the highest response rate that I have experienced during my work at the ESRI. Then we focused in on 5 case study areas for further analysis, and we had in-depth interviews with LDCs, CEOs, the staff, participants, local employers, and also key policy stakeholders. This table here that I'm presenting, what this shows is the data that we were using. So it's the distribution of interventions. Individuals can receive different interventions over different goals, but overall within the sample, we had over 30,000 individuals at that time point in 2018, before the pandemic, who were receiving interventions through SICAP across a range of goals. What I want to identify here is our treated group was about 3,000 individuals who were receiving employment supports, whether that was across goal 2.4, 2.6, predominantly. Our control group were individuals who had never received employment supports, but who had received who had received other supports through SICAP around personal development, well-being, and lifelong learning. When we looked at the profile of our sample in comparing them to individuals of our the full SICAP sample, what we found was the individuals in our sample, our pre-employment supports group, were really significantly more disadvantaged than the whole sample of SciCap. So those with lower levels of educational attainment, that was leaving cert or less, they were 11 percentage points less likely to move into employment and self-employment compared to the other individuals engaging in SciCap. But those who were unemployed for 2 or more years were also considerably less likely to move into employment and self-employment by 5 percentage points. And that's just the averages of the raw data, not the counterfactual analysis, which I will move on to. But I want to point out progression into employment and self-employment for these individuals was lower in the case for females, those who were lone parents, those who were older participants, that was 55, age 55 or more, those living in more disadvantaged areas, those reporting a disability, ethnic minority, and or a transport barrier. So if individuals had any one of these characteristics, they were more likely to find it difficult to move into employment or self-employment. And that's important to be aware of. And we have more recent information that shows that to be true for a wider cohort. So I'll conclude with what was the main findings of this report. We found a very positive counterfactual impact on employment for both employment and self-employment interventions. In fact, what we found was those who had enrolled and received employment reports through SciCap, they were 18 percentage points more likely to progress into employment. That was employment or self-employment. Particularly 8 percentage points more likely to progress into an employment, 30 percentage points more likely to progress into self-employment if they were going through that route. Now, the effects were found to persist after 6 months, okay? That's the distance of data that we had in terms of the time frame. What we found was, and I'm struck by the conversation around Friendly Call, because it really is a one-to-one intervention. So we found that the results were really driven by the one-to-one employment interventions rather than the group supports. Although they went hand in hand, this was borne out in the qualitative interviews that we had, but we were also able to check it within the data. And many individuals reported the motivation and confidence that had been developed as a result of this supports. And the supportive relationship with staff was really seen as unique and very, very central to the SciCap approach. So as I've said, the one-to-one supports were viewed as crucial. So what are these one-to-one supports for those who may or may not be aware? They were a range of tailored, unique to the individual, I would say, activities often in cases. Whether that was encouragement, mentorship, job search assistance, CV preparation, which was spoken in the last video as well, facilitating help in areas of literacy, numeracy, mental health, in addition to providing assistance in something that may seem very simple, but providing help in making phone calls, filling out job applications, and aiding participants to overcome their unique individual practical barriers to employment and self-employment. These were all seen as profound and very, very significant. Also, another thing that was noted, that the contact was maintained over a significant period to support beneficiaries who were already engaged in employment, so who had made that transition. So to support them in an ongoing basis to remain in employment or remain on courses over a duration of time. As I've said, the courses were often used in supplementing one-to-one supports. Two things I want to address here. One was workshops on issues such as tax returns, social media was seen as very important for those moving into self-employment. They reported these as being very helpful. And then courses also designed to enhance personal development, attitudinal skills among a target group. And what we found was LDCs were often trying to embed high interest courses. So particularly focused on their own beneficiaries within the locality. One example is driver theory in some areas to attract young participants. So LDCs really play a key role also in providing connection to local services and stakeholders. So this signposting, directing to other services around was seen as highly influential and helpful for individuals who are engaged with SICAP. So the provision of other employment services at LDC level really shaped the kinds of employment supports offered at a local level. Now, the report the findings are from 2019, but it highlighted a lack of mental health and psychological services locally. And I can only imagine that that is still an issue after the pandemic. One can expect that this remains an issue and maybe has become more profound. There was also a variation in the level of contact with employers across LDCs, we found. We found that those engaging with caseloads who faced multiple barriers, greater challenges, they tended to lack the same engagement with employers. So there was greater scope for LDCs, some LDCs, to strengthen links with employers, whether that be directly or through increased interaction with regional skills fora, the DEASP jobs fairs, etc. And I suppose with a tight labour market, LDCs might find employers are more open to interaction also in the current climate. So what are the implications for policy then? In the context, as I've said, of a tight labour market, the long-term unemployed and the economically inactive, they're increasingly made up of those facing multiple barriers. So somebody who has remained unemployed, maybe before the pandemic, into the pandemic, through the pandemic, we're talking about a scarring effect for those individuals and making it more difficult for them to make that transition. So LDCs highlighted the lack of self-confidence, even in 2018, alongside a large range of more challenging issues. So poor mental health, substance abuse, and homelessness among the target group. So very, very severe and difficult disadvantages that individuals are facing throughout the country. It was also found in rural areas. Access to and also the costs associated with transport were seen as persistent barriers to the target group, whether that be for them to engage in education, to engage in training and or employment. So this is something to keep in mind. Now, SICAP employment supports, they really are part of a broader suite of employment supports. But I want to highlight, they really, really occupy a distinctive place in this context. And the reasons for this are multiple, but I will point to some of the most specific. The supports are flexible and they're very personalized supports, so individual and group. And even through education supports that people look at for a wide range of age groups, individual personalized supports are found to be very effective in terms of helping individuals to move in the direction that they wish. They have a holistic approach. There's a voluntary nature in the engagement, which is important. And also the self-employment supports are certainly niche compared to what else is available in the broader suite of employment supports. Then finally, the approach was seen by LDCs, stakeholders and beneficiaries as especially important working with individuals distanced from the labour market. This specific approach was most important for those furthest from the labour market. Then a couple of other points. One is in relation to outreach work and the other to extended tracking. So outreach work was seen as successful by many LDCs. It's time consuming, it's difficult, but it allowed a greater engagement with harder to reach groups. And there's certainly potential for this work to be further extended. The second, in terms of extended tracking, so from a researcher perspective, it would be helpful to see individuals access employment supports over a longer range of time. So ideally that linked into administrative data sets, so we can really point to long run impacts which are potentially there. So what I've presented today is after 6 months. It would be interesting to see over a longer time frame how beneficial the supports are. Then finally, I want to point to another report, not authored by myself, but recently published by others in the Institute. So this was published in the last couple of weeks. It was commissioned by the Department of Social Protection, and it's looking at statistical profiling for individuals, so the probability to exit into employment. This is for a much larger cohort, so the full It's not just those further from the labour market, but the entirety. And what they found was job seekers at risk of becoming long-term unemployed. Okay, so when an individual first registers with an Intrio office after becoming unemployed, there's a PEC score calculated. How likely is it that this individual is going to move into employment? This is something that was originally developed around 2009, but it has been updated. It used to consist of 35 questions. This recent study has found 8 key characteristics are associated with the risk of long-term unemployment. I want to point to the fact that they don't differ very much to what I've already presented for the SICAP individuals. Those, you're more likely to have a risk of long-term unemployment if you're claiming job seekers allowance, if you have not been recently employed, if you have low levels of educational attainment, if you have poor self-perceived health. Now, that was something we didn't have in the data for SICAP at that time. If you have a history of long-term unemployment, if you've previously been involved in a community employment scheme, if you don't have access to your own transport, and again, if you are in the older cohort. What is interesting from this report is the pattern of exiting unemployment in 2018 was very similar to that actually in 2006 when it was previously looked at, even though these two time periods are 12 years apart and there's a global recession in the middle. Perhaps also the pandemic, not much has changed here. These individuals are the ones that are in most need of supports. And so I will leave my presentation there. I'm happy to share my slides. They also include links of the reports, which include much more in-depth analysis of the detailed studies that I talk about here. And I'm welcome to take any questions in the Q&A. And also, please feel free to contact me directly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adele, for a very comprehensive presentation. I'm sure people will have many questions because there have been loads of issues have been raised, particularly around SICAP and towards the end there, long-term unemployment. We will have an opportunity later on in the Q&A. Adele will be staying with us, so we look forward to that. So if you have any questions, we'll take them later on. Our next presentation now is another video, and Brenda Barry will introduce the video to us.
Esmeraldo is part of our video today, and he has been interviewed by Susan Long, one of our employment support development workers. Esmeraldo is originally from Angola. He's in Ireland since 2019. He's a singer, a musician, dancer, composer, choreographer, dance teacher, actor and cameraman. He currently makes a living as a construction labourer with ward personnel. He's performed on TG4's Space Between, RTE's Today Show, The Electric Picnic 2022, Citadel and Strive Theatre, and he's done some work with Cork Community Radio as well. He is a sanctuary runner and a swimmer and is currently awaiting decision on whether he will be permitted to remain in Ireland. I just have a video.
Hi, I'm Susan Long, and today I'm with Esmeraldo Taveras. Hi, Esmeraldo.
Hi, Susan.
You're very welcome to Cork City Partnership.
My pleasure.
I'd like to ask you maybe to tell us a bit about your story.
Esmeraldo Tavares. Born 1987. So I'm dance teacher, and also I'm cameraman. I work on TV station, and I've been dancing and teaching more than 15 years. Mm-hmm. Arrived here in Ireland 2019, the end of 2019.
So just before COVID-19.
Yeah, before the COVID, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. I spent nearly 1 year in County Clare, Milton Malbay.
Nearly a year.
Yeah, nearly.
Okay.
And after I came here in Cork.
Okay.
Yeah, in Cork, I'm here about 2 years now.
The people in SICAP in Milltown Malbay, which are part of Clare Partnership, contacted Cork City Partnership to advise us that there was a group of asylum seekers being moved to Cork in the middle of the pandemic, and that they would need employment services, and that, you know, somebody needed to look after them, you know, and that job came to me then. So like SICAP in Clare got in contact with SICAP in Cork, you know, so the services were kind of linked up, and that's how we came to meet then, you know.
Actually, I didn't know that. I didn't
Yeah.
know that, but I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised because Hamilton Malbay community, they are lovely. And as I said, I got a help from the people that I don't know.
So can we talk about maybe some of the supports that you got from SICAP in Cork City Partnership now, okay?
So I got a lot, but let me just mention the like, let's see if I can remember some of the things. I got my CV, I got Safe Pass, and also I got forklift license. Forklift license, and yeah, I can say this is one of the most relevant that I got. But I got main support from SECAP here as well.
Okay, great. So one final question, and that is, what do you want to do next now, Esmeralda? What does the future hold for you?
So future, the first is, first I have to make sure that I'll be here, because I don't know what will be the final decision of IPO about my case. I don't know yet.
So there's uncertainty there about about your staying in Ireland.
Because I don't know yet. But once I know that I can stay, I wanna show off my talent, you know, everything that I can do. Actually, one of the the thing that I'd like to do is open my own space, my studio, and I can do different art that I like to do, as music, dancing, recording, because everything that I used to do involved art. Cameraman, dance teacher, songwriter, singer, and so on. Theater, I start doing theater now as well. Is one of the biggest things is to open my studio and do everything that I can or that I like to do.
So you will be unleashing all that talent when you get the good news, hopefully, that you're allowed to stay here.
Oh yes, and we'll relax and we'll take a deep breath and
party.
Thank you, Susan and Emeraldo, and we wish him well, and hopefully his status will be sorted out sooner rather than later. Obviously in Cork we recognise all his talents, and we're delighted to have him here, and obviously it's probably a big loss to Clare, but we're delighted he's in Cork, and maybe looking forward, like everybody else, to enjoying the jazz over the weekend. So thanks very much for that. Our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is Sophie Crosby. Sophie works as the Regional Director for the South within IBEC's Employer Relations Division. Sophie is a qualified barrister and Australian lawyer, and holds postgraduate qualifications in both mediation and coaching. A highly experienced employee relations practitioner with a demonstrated track record in both Ireland and Australia. Sophie works extensively with IBEC members, devising and implementing strategies to identify and overcome employee relations and human resources challenges. She has extensive experience in employment law, industrial relations and advocacy services. So you're very welcome, Sophie.
Thanks very much. I'm kind of blushing here. And thank you very much for Cork City Partnership for the invitation to talk to you this morning. Thankfully, what I'm going to talk to you about today is nothing to do with really what the day job is, but really what I want to do is kind of take you through the journey that we've been on as an organisation with our members and ourselves in terms of how we've seen that the labour market has changed and how the work environment has changed in the nearly 2.5 years since COVID first came to us. So if you bear with me for a bit, this is kind of anecdotal, more so than data driven. So I hope you bear with me in terms of the perception. Happy to take any questions at any stage during the process. I suppose it's very hard to realise actually now, but we're actually 2.5 years since COVID hit us. And in ways, it's almost like we've had two big experiments. The first experiment was almost like the hot water shock treatment of COVID and how organisations instantly had to adapt to the changing working environment that COVID presented themselves. And then secondly, we're now living through a second experiment, which is a much longer, slower experiment, more like a pot on a stove, slowly coming to a temperature, of hybrid working and where that's going to end up for organisations. So I suppose if I could take some time to take through the difference between the two and from our experience, what that has meant for organisations and the challenges and opportunities that has presented, that would be helpful. So I suppose in March 2020, it was immersive. It was total sink or swim. I had been in Australia the week before. We came back. There was a whole initial focus on the childcare sector and schools closing. Even people trying to learn how to sign on was a massive focus in the first couple of days. And there was a huge focus for employers on just simply getting their operations adapting and learning what the scenario was. And within IBEC, we had to move from our traditional services of, advocacy and representation and employment law and industrial relations into suddenly becoming experts in EWSS, revenue assistance, support for employers, and a frontline support for HR managers trying to deal with the challenges. And the big focus initially was on job retention, focusing on who was and who wasn't an essential service, who could and who could not stay open. At one stage, even at that stage, the call went out for PPE. And we had members in the pharmaceutical and the medtech industry scouring their warehouses, looking for PPE to supply to hospitals and membership. So it was a very active, dynamic couple of weeks. And that period of time had real threats and real impacts potentially to employment numbers within Ireland. Like, for example, if I can take, for example, the medtech industry, which is a large employer in the Cork region here, the cancellation worldwide of elective hospital procedures meant that some of our members had an 80% drop in demand for their product in the month of April that year. So Ireland is one of the top 5 centres for medtech globally. We've over 300 companies working in that space with over 40,000 employees. So there was a real threat and risk of layoffs to companies. So the wage subsidy scheme became critical to keeping people on the payroll and keeping people employed over that initial period. And most of them were out of it within a very short period of time, but it stopped that initial panic within employers to keep people working. So it worked very, very well. And then over the next 18 months, our experience as an economy and as a business community was that by staying together and collaborating and staying socially cohesive, we retain both our social cohesion and our ability to react quickly to changing circumstances. And Ireland is very unique in a number of industries, particularly with, say, the medtech and the pharma industry, because it's very high level of collaboration and information sharing between companies that would compete potentially in the open market. And that's because of our small relationship-driven society that we largely have in Ireland. And then that in turn, then, because there's that high degree of collaboration and engagement with each other, that then becomes a source of competitive advantage when we have to pivot quickly. So I suppose there was a phrase I grew up with in the 1970s where my father used to say, well, the family that prays together stays together. And then he used to say, well, actually in his line, it was the family that sails together stays together. But that really stood to us in Ireland as an economy over the whole COVID period. And I suppose if I can, most of you have probably never looked at the IBEC logo, but if you look at the IBEC logo, it's what's called a spiral philophaxis, which is the center of a sunflower. It's the symbol in nature that shows the strongest part of a plant, always growing, always moving, always looking for space to grow and expand. And that's how we work in IBEC. So we had really high levels of member engagement. We, like a lot of organizations, we switched to remote working instantly and collaboration using online tools and webinars. And what was fascinating about it was that as problems came up, biopharma would come up with the science, they'd pass that solution on, they'd have the scientific solution, that would then pass on to retail. Retail would come up with a quick way of fixing and solving a social distancing problem. And all of that collaboration and information sharing was really, really fast and dynamic from one side of the economy to another. And at the same time then, we had the hospitality and the hotel sector giving everybody lessons in resilience, you know, and keeping things in perspective. So that storytelling, information sharing, and just that highly networked nature of Irish society, where people are relationship driven, really stood to us during that period of time and helped us stay cohesive. And I suppose when we look at what companies learned from that period, where a lot of companies were fully remote working for that period of time, and lots of companies went fully remote immediately, okay? And I suppose what we learned was, we learned to deal with the technology, we learned the importance of work-life balance, we learned about how important childcare and elder care was, and the challenges that it presents to our workforce when those pieces of the pie of the jigsaw aren't working correctly. We learned that there was differences in culture between people who were in essential services, who were going in, who got used to working in very small numbers, as skeleton staff in manufacturing sites, versus people who were working at home. And we learned the importance of structured communications for people who were working from home and had to establish new ways of working. So lots of companies set up systems around daily and twice weekly check-ins with individuals and teams. There was lots of regular short meetings. That we saw a huge growth in decentralized communications for people, whether it was through, you know, Teams chats, Microsoft Office chats, WhatsApps, informal WhatsApp. So that growth of trying to replace organizational culture that you get in the office through virtual means. And I suppose organizations got used to distractions, whether it be cats or children or the neighbor, you know, doing their foundations next door in the house. They have to be lived with and acknowledged. And for a lot of organizations, they had a transformational shift towards a positive employee support. And that was the upside of it. And then on the downside of it then was with virtual communications, you know, your emotions are not always seen, heard, and felt in a virtual communication form. But I'll come back to that. So then from an organizational coordination point of view, we had to use technology to make new connections with each other and to nurture old connections in different ways. And we had to have very clear rules of engagement around to increase our efficiency and to reduce anxiety for people. So, you know, when do you use cameras? When do you phone in? When do you instant message? I mean, for me personally, I found myself at times going back to using the phone as a way of building relationships and listening adequately to people, because I found that cameras at times could become too intense and too distracting for people, because you'd be looking at what you perceive people are doing on the screen rather than listening to what they're saying. And we learned to make people accountable in different ways, whether it was one-to-one meetings, formalized tracking systems. But I think the big learning for people around remote working was that how task-focused people can become when they're remote working. So you have to make a very clear, straight effort with organizations to connect the tasks that people were doing with the overall organizational purpose. And then I think the other big change for organizations was that your workplace culture was no longer defined in your physical workplace terms. I know that sounds logical, but for a lot of organizations, your place that you worked in was your organization, and it was defined by the people you worked with, whether that was a small office or a big headquarters in Dublin too. So as a result, because that sense of place became virtual or became hybrid, huge cultural opportunities came out for organizations for cross-site culture and collaboration. So that made a massive opportunity for organizational culture. Like, for example, with us in IBEC, we have six different sites. So for us, suddenly we were building relationships with people closely in Brussels and Donegal and places that we would normally not have dealt with on a day-to-day basis at all. But because of that, it was bringing us all closer together. And when the whole period of remote working ended, nobody wanted to go back to the way it was before, because suddenly we had defined the organization in holistic terms rather than in place or location terms. And, we had to work hard around whole areas of social closeness, not all of which were successful. So, there was the dreaded, sometimes you had the successful office quiz, but more often than not, it was the dreaded online Christmas party that people just hated. And I think the biggest change for a lot of organizations and managers was that they had to actively demonstrate trust with each other. They had no choice, they were forced to do it. So I can't see you, so I have to trust that you're doing the right thing, became the modus operandi during COVID. And that was a big change for a lot of organizations, because traditionally you might have to see someone or be with somebody to be able to trust that what they were saying or doing was the right thing. And then there was a huge amount of work around agile coordination in terms of things like sharing documents in live time, sharing calendars, other live tools. That was a huge change in ways of working for a lot of organizations. And I suppose then if we look at the downsides of what we learned out of the remote working experience during COVID, we found that whereas remote working was very efficient for information sharing and for bringing people together from different locations and for running meetings on time with specific start and finish times, so much so that we had organizations having to build in loo breaks into people's calendars, or what became known as bio breaks at one stage. But we found that, or people started to find that, the online hybrid was less successful for anything which required people's full presence or full attention. There was the temptation for people to be multitasking when you're on screen, or to be listening with half an ear and doing something else. The risk of presenteeism or attention drift. We found that hybrid working or remote and online was particularly poor for anything which required an emotional connection or resolving conflict or anything that required an empathetic connection between humans. There was a risk of overload. There was a risk of sensory overload. Like at one stage, I think both the Workplace Relations Commission and the Labour Court had moved to using the WebEx platform. And the WebEx platform for security reasons, and the WebEx platform had very poor sound at times. And you would find that people were getting sensory overload and getting irritated, and discussions were breaking down and real conflict situations emerging for nothing more than people being unaware that there was buzzing in the line. And it was something that was quite, I haven't spotted it at all. I just spotted that, God, people were getting cranky, and I was getting cranky with people that I would never normally get cranky with, or that I would have been in grooves of working with for many months or many years. And, you have people shouting across screens at you in trade union situations or whatever. And it was only one day when I was down at a sports, and I was listening to the wind in the wind in the rigging of boats where I was down sailing, and I was realizing how noisy they were. And it brought me back 20 years to something that had happened to me in my childhood. And I asked somebody, and I said, what's the story there? And they said, oh, no. They said, the modern boats have metal rigging and they're much noisier than 20 years ago, because my brain was telling me that this was that we were in a storm situation, and I was reacting like a lunatic, going into hyperactive protective mother mode. Sorry, now this probably isn't making much sense, but essentially what was happening to me was I was having an emotional reaction to the sensory circumstances that were around me. And it was inherent, it was absolutely crystal clear and based on a memory from 20 years earlier. Whereas actually, in fact, the circumstances had changed. And for a lot of people working and living on Zoom, that impact was creeping in, that people were getting brain reactions that they weren't even aware of, and reacting in ways that they would never react in a face-to-face setting. And it was very interesting and challenging for me, because I find I'm one of these people, and I listen I listen with my body, I listen with my emotional perception of other people. So when you're only listening with your ears, you're actually, for me, I was finding I was only hearing 40% of what was going on. My signals and my communication style was picked up. And then what happened then was, what you found then is equally what I found was that people didn't move into, because they never felt heard. You never moved into conflict resolution stage, because you got locked in this emotional feedback loop of I'm trying to tell you what's going on for me. the other person isn't picking up empathetically what's going on. So we're going around in circles. Whereas when you sit with somebody in a conflict situation in a room and you move into the empathetic mode, you move beyond the conflict and you move into solution mode then at that stage. But when in an online setting, that cycle was being interrupted. So what was happening for people in conciliation conferences, for example, online, was that they were at risk of becoming entrenched and going around and around in circles. So it was a really challenging experience and learning opportunity for a lot of people during that period of time. And, you know, the danger is then in that situation is that people become disconnected, they get caught in their own self-talk. And what happens is the empathetic feedback seems to happen from an internal purpose or with the other people who are in the room with them. So very early on in the process, we found that union officials, no matter what the conflict situation was, would actively go out and try and sit with their members in the room so that they were in a better position to influence what was going on, because they found that they just couldn't influence their members from outside the room. So it was a very interesting period, and apologies, I've probably gone on a bit long, and I hope I'm okay for time, Michael, at this stage, because I want to move on to the hybrid side of it now, if I may. Am I okay for time? Brenda?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're fine.
Oh yeah, lovely.
Perfect.
So I suppose from a hybrid side then perspective, what we found then is hybrid is obviously here to stay. And I'm just going to share some slides there, if I may. We did a HR survey with our members there in October. It's a regular HR update survey that we do every year. And what we found was we had 329 participating companies on this, employing over 143,000 employees. And what we found was that in 2021, over 60% of our senior HR business leaders told us that hybrid working was here to stay. But by this year, that had moved up to 74, to nearly to 75%.
Okay, can I just interrupt you a second? The slides are the wrong way around, could you?
Oh, I beg your pardon. I'm so sorry.
Okay,
Am I on the wrong screen?
you're back on there now again.
So just
I do
share again,
apologise.
maybe.
Yeah, if you could share them again, we'll see if are they the right way.
Is that it?
Yeah,
Yep.
you're okay now, thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, apologies, and I'll try and speed up a bit. I'm so sorry. So if I look down to what are our HR managers are telling us is what are their priorities, the number one priority for all our HR managers at the moment is the availability of talent and skills to fill vacancies. It was for 46% of them, it was their top challenge. And for 89% of them, it was one of their top 5 challenges. Equally, from that perspective, they're seeing that expectations for career progression or available training is a huge issue. So there's a war on retention of talent going on for people within the workplace at the moment. And then another huge challenge for them is their expectations amongst their staff for flexible and remote working. And that makes sense because when you think about the hybrid working world that we're moving to, it's a bit like the difference between a knife and a fork and a set of chopsticks. When an employer looks at the issue of flexible or hybrid working, one side of it is looking at a knife at times, and the other side of it is looking at a fork. Whereas actually, what we've got to learn to do as organisations is to learn how to use chopsticks as an organisation, where you can have same customs and rules for everybody, but that the organisation as a whole thrives and is adaptable and able to move. So if we look at what is worrying organisations at the moment is the potential for talent leaving their industries, or for talent choosing to relocate within Ireland, or our existing talent in Ireland choosing to relocate externally. That's a big priority for organisations. And where their numbers and their focus is on both attracting and retention of employees. So it's a big buzzword for organisations at the moment and a big priority. And if we look at where the dial has shifted in terms of organisations' business model, we're seeing the dial shift from last year when more people seemed to think that we would go back to the way things were, or at least that it wouldn't be as big a factor, to now everyone seeing that hybrid working is the way forward. From 74% of people seeing that side of it, with flexing working arrangements. So it's having a fundamental shift in terms of the way people are working and how we are all going through. And it's not just a HR priority, it's also a CEO priority, because in January this year, nearly 30% of CEOs told us it was their top priority. And over 70% of them told us it was one of their top 5 priorities. And it ranked highest on our issues, ahead of even the cost of doing business in Ireland. It'd be interesting to see when that CEO research is done again later this year, whether that continues to be the case, given the whole energy price pressures and inflation price pressures that are creeping back into the organisation. But we'll give you an example of the underlying trends. And one of the things about hybrid working is that there's a paradox in there. Like, people want the flexibility to work from anywhere, but at the same time, we all crave in-person connection. And I'm sure we've all had the situation where you've gone to the office to crave that in-person connection, and then you find that potentially people aren't there, or there isn't the in-person connection, or that the people who are there work in a different way to you. So some people want sociability when they go to the office, and other people find that, well, actually the office is where I do my quiet focus time, because at home there's childcare or interruptions or otherwise that are getting in the way of my quiet focus time. So it's really, people are having to redefine where is their anchor for focused work, because what's become very clear is that the situation is still very, very fluid. And if I can just move on to the next slide, the most common response we're finding in terms of people's trends is that the manager or the team will decide their working arrangements. The second most common we're finding is that either people are required to be on site 3 days a week, or organizations haven't fully decided yet. So it's quite fluid. And what we're observing is obviously that, and we would all be aware of this, is how employees are more likely to put their family and their personal life over work, and more likely to prioritize their health and well-being for people who are already in work. And that's requiring employers to rethink their working values. So from, I suppose, from a working from home perspective, you know, there's the 3 biggies for individuals and organizations in that are the work-life balance, the need to do focused work, and the length of the commute. But I suppose for people in the regional situation, not everyone has a bad commute, and some people do focus better when they're in their office, whether it's due to broadband or interruption issues at home, or just to separate better their work and family life. So it's not a copy and paste situation for many organizations or teams. And I suppose it comes down to where a lot of organizations are debating now is the why around being in the office. Because if you don't have a clear why around being in the office, then why not move to 100% remote for certain roles or certain teams? And what's very clear coming out now for organizations is people need to be in the office together for collaboration, for social interaction, for the network availability, for furniture, for, in some cases, it's availability of food and drink if there's canteens on site, heat and energy use, and for new starters or less experienced employees, it's that informal learning experience gaining that's really hard to replicate in a virtual setting. Some organizations can do it, and some roles are well suited to it. But for other organizations, that you can't substitute for that immersion of folks around them, that somebody can, you know, have that informal learning and culture piece that moves on. And I suppose, you know, as humans, we're built differently. Some of us are focused on being extrovert and need the energy that you get from other people around. And others are more introvert and they need the calm, quiet, focused space in which to work and collaborate effectively. So depending on the organization or team culture, so I've talked to some organizations where that quiet, collaborative, focused collaboration space is very much office-based. And other organizations where they're saying, well, look, you know, we're doing different zones for different types of teams, depending on the nature of the team and how people work from that perspective. And I suppose what's key in relation to this is that one person's flexibility can be another person's always on. So in IBEC, we've moved from what we had originally done, which was a 2 day a week on site, 2 to 3 days a week on site model, where we've now moved it to an average 50% time over the month on site model. And in doing that, we've recognized that actually for a lot of our folks here within IBEC, we could be working on site from anywhere. Like, we could be out on a member company, we could be at a hearing, we could be at a stakeholder engagement meeting and such. So we've defined that across the course of the month to have that greater flexibility, and then allow the teams to actually work out what that means in practice. And then we've now worked our system then around anchor days, where each team has a set anchor day where people are based office-based to have that essential networking and team collaboration. And I suppose one of the things that we've seen again with the move to hybrid back from remote has been the reemergence of the informal chat, the informal phone call, whether that's in the corridor or the meeting room, or a quick Teams chat to people. So I think if we look at it then from opportunities both for an employer and an employee side of things, one of the things that we've seen as a massive change for organizations is that labor markets have been redefined over COVID. And we would see members who historically would have seen themselves as limited in terms of tied to place in terms of labor market, but those rules don't apply anymore. So that creates a huge opportunity in terms of individuals working in rural areas or across the organization, because one of the massive advantages, and we've two massive natural advantages in Ireland that we don't always appreciate. One is that we're small and our distances are low. So the prospect of doing what we would consider to be a relatively long commute suddenly becomes more achievable when you're only doing it once or twice a month, or 3 or 4 or once a week, as distinct from every day. And that's a huge, massive competitive advantage that we're probably not even aware of about, because our distances are relatively low. Like, if I think about back from my experience living in Melbourne, where you could spend 2 hours driving from one side of the city to the other, in Ireland, a 2-hour drive means you're nearly in Dublin. So that becomes a much more achievable aspect from a labour market point of view, as long as people have access to their own transport. The second massive strategic natural advantage we have in Ireland is our time zones, because within our time zone in Ireland, it allows us to do business internationally on both sides of the world every day within the same working day. And that's a reason for a lot of organizations citing their shared services centres here, because of that capacity to get business done within the working day. So that's a huge another aspect of things as we move, to a digital and hybrid world for us. So what we've already seen with COVID, that it has increased female labour force participation rate, but it creates this change in the labour market creates a huge opportunity for folks who might traditionally have seen their labour market as restricted to the area or location in which they worked in. And what it's meant for organisations who are fully remote is that their labour market now is defined in national terms. Interestingly, one of the things that we would have seen last 12 months is that the number of instances of employers reporting working from home abroad has decreased from 14% down to 9%. And that's obviously for tax and location reasons, that people are moving away from the working from home abroad model and trying to eliminate that model as much as possible. But we're still seeing, specific teams working remotely full-time 100% within organizations at home, which changes the dynamics of the labour market. And then I suppose from an Ireland opportunity point of view for employers, we're still members of the EU, we're still English speaking, we have a very stable investment environment, and this in turn drives capital investment from companies. So that gives, you'll start to see the latest wave of investment announcements coming in terms of expansion of plants and new plants planned, which in turn then can create capacity constraints on growth as we try to come to terms of that investment. And one other big change that I would have noticed in the last couple of years is the number of growth of global roles that are now based within the multinationals within Ireland. So we'd see an increased number of folks who were based within global roles within Ireland, which in turn is good for Ireland in some ways, because it allows us to move up the value chain in terms of influencing and decision-making opportunities within the global decision-making structure. And that's quite important within the multinational sector, because a lot of multinationals tend to be matrix-driven organizations. So a lot of time and energy can be spent trying to actually devote to find out where does the decision-making process lie and where it is, who has decision-making accountability. So they're quite different from SMEs in that space. And it becomes a challenge then for individuals who are trying to service in and feeding into the sector at the same time. I suppose from a challenge then perspective, it means then that digital skills become absolutely essential in terms of going forward. And I'm sure we'll hear more from the next speaker in relation to this. And our limits in terms of housing has created a capacity constraint on growth because it restricts the ability of companies to bring in talent from outside. I think one of our biggest challenges Ireland in the next couple of years will be, how do we persuade and ensure that our young people choose to continue to stay in Ireland, particularly if they have difficulty accessing the housing market? You know, an individual who can't buy a house becomes a lot more mobile talent for organizations. So the real challenge for some of our multinational employers in the next number of years will be, as our young people decide that, you know, that they're interested in more values-driven organizations and in, you know, big brand employment opportunities. How do we continue to ensure that our young people choose to actively attract and stay within our communities? And I think it's really important to see the role of social enterprise in ensuring that we can continue to attract and retain our young people and keep them to stay and working within our communities and help our communities to adapt and thrive to the challenges, particularly of climate change that's coming on thick and fast, that we have to adapt as a country. So I'm sorry that I've gone on a bit long, and I hope I've been a bit more wide-ranging than anything else, but I do hope that's of some help. So thank you. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thanks, Sophie. It was, first of all, apologies for having to interrupt you early on, but I think you've given us a lot of answers in relation to how the employment situation has changed dramatically over the last number of years. But I would also suspect you've created a situation where people have a lot of questions to ask as well, and I know that you're staying with us for the Q&A later on. There was a comment put up as you were speaking. I don't know whether you've seen it or not, or whether you want to talk about it now. Did you see that?
It's that piece around sensory input. Thanks, Jennifer. I'm just going to read it out because, yeah, from Jennifer Marr. Thanks, Sophie. Sensory input and emotional awareness is such an important point you made, and very topical, leading to the quitting trend, or what we've always known as disengagement. I couldn't agree with you more, Jennifer. Like, the whole experience of coming back into the office, I think we have to realize that as humans, we are social creatures, and that period around social engagement is so important. And it's a real challenge for organizations actually who are mixing hybrid and remote teams together, or individuals working fully remote and hybrid together, because the person who's working fully remote has a very different need and dynamic from their manager than the person who is hybrid in the office. And trying to keep it's very difficult to mix the two. Personally, I prefer to have it either or within a particular team.
Thanks, Sophie.
Thanks, Sophie, and we'll talk to you again later. Our next item on the agenda now is Brenda Barry again will introduce the next clip for us.
Yeah. And here we have a client also called Sophie. Sophie has been a client of Cork City Local Employment Services before, during and after lockdown. Sophie is an artist specialising in glass and has been engaged with Cork City Partnership SICAP through employment supports and enterprise supports. She has her own business, Longwell Studios, and a brand of jewellery, Pinkin, and she's also working part-time. So she will tell her story there. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Katrina. I'm here with Sophie, who is a former client of Cork City Partnership Employment Services. She's here to talk to us about her experience of working with Cork City Partnership over the last few years. Hi, Sophie. How are you doing?
Good.
Just tell me a little bit about your experience of working with Cork City Partnership over the last few years.
Yeah, sure thing. So I moved down to Cork around 2018, end of 2018. And at first I was still continuing my job that was in Dublin and working remotely, but I was working for a jeweller and I was posting things back and forth. It wasn't really that practical. So after a while that job did come to an end and I went to the Cork City Partnership, I was trying to find work for ages and having some trouble. So I thought after a while I'll just hire myself. So I thought I'd start my own business. So I applied to the Back to Enterprise Allowance, and I came in, I talked to Tony in Cork City Partnership, and he went through my business plan with me, and I also did a Start Your Own Business course that was recommended. And so I started my company Longwell Studio in 2019, and that was great. We did lots of things through that, like I did the Young Entrepreneurs Award, and I was doing loads of exhibitions. So I do glass sculptures, but because it's glass, it's kind of in between craft and fine art. So I was doing loads of like shows and gallery work, but then I was also trying to sell some kind of more commercial retail pieces. I was doing like artist residencies and all that kind of thing. So everything was kind of going well. I was getting like awards for my work and that kind of thing. And then end of 2019, I was on an artist residency in Germany and Scotland for 2 months. And when I came back, I had a job offer that sounded great, that they were looking for a glass artist, and I'd been recommended to them. So I was up in Northern Ireland. So I went up there, and it was just the starting of 2020, and then the lockdown hit. So yeah.
So how did lockdown affect you?
It was tough, like, because I'd only just moved up to this new town. I was up in Omagh, which is a small town in Northern Ireland, and I didn't know anybody, and it was like new job, new place and everything. It was fine for the first few months, and I was enjoying it and getting stuck into the work. We were doing some really cool, like, large scale projects. But then when the lockdowns hit, it was really tough because I was living in a little apartment by myself as well, and I just didn't see any of my family or friends for like 2 months, and we were on furlough, so we weren't going into the office or anything. And yeah, it was just really, really tough going. And then when they reopened the business, the work kind of changed, and they were making a lot of redundancies and everything. You know, they were under huge pressure because of everything from COVID. So I kind of decided to just come back to Cork because I miss my family so much as well. And I was like, I'll give it another go. So I came back, and then we still had more lockdowns. That was like in the summer of 2020.
Okay.
So I came back and I was like, I want to start my business again, but I need a bit of help with the business side. I have all the art skills, but I wasn't sure about the business side. So I think it was around then that I got talking to you, and the Cork City Partnership again, and I ended up doing a springboard course. So that was through Ulster University, and it was a course in business management and entrepreneurship. So that's what I was doing over the lockdowns. And that was brilliant. It was great. It was all remote, but it was lovely.
The lockdown opened up the opportunity to do more remote learning and stuff.
Yeah, it was really, I'd never done anything like that before. But I was surprised at how much we really got to know each other as classmates and like formed great friendships as well. And it was invaluable for me, everything that we learned on that course, because in art school they don't really teach you anything about business. So I had all these skills, but there were so many aspects that I just really needed to learn more about, like project management and finances and sales and marketing and all that kind of thing. So that was brilliant. So once the lockdowns, in between, I got a studio space at the National Sculpture Factory here in Cork, and so I was able to get stuck back into making my work, and it was a really good productive time there. Like, I got an Arts Council award and got selected by Portfolio, the Design and Crafts Council. So I'm now kind of recognised as one of the best makers in Ireland and the best in Europe. So that's really nice. Done. But at the same time, not making any money from it because that's how it works with art sometimes. So that's what I've been working like so hard on it. And then just the last few months, with kind of the cost of living going up so much, and like Brexit, a lot of my materials come from the UK as well, so that's been a big thing. The cost of everything just getting so high, I decided to start applying for, I was like, really, I'm going to need to get a day job to keep this going and to fund my business as well. So that's when I called you and I said, I got a job.
I got a job, yeah. What do I do now?
Yeah.
So how was the the job helping with balancing it?
It's brilliant. It's very different. I'd always kind of worked in things that were in some way creative, but actually I was like, it'd be great to do something that's totally different, part of my brain in a way. So I applied to lots of different things, but I ended up getting hired by CPL, who are a recruitment agency, but it's actually for Bank of Ireland, and it's working remotely doing support calls, so customer service.
Yeah.
And I never would have thought of doing something like that, but my boyfriend works in customer support and he's like, you know, you're great with people and I think you'd be good at this, so why don't you give it a go? And they're always looking for people to do that kind of work, and you can work from home as well. So yeah, so I got hired and started there at the start of August, and it's been great. I'm really enjoying it, finding it really interesting. A lot to learn, so it can be quite challenging sometimes. Like there's just so much to learn.
Yeah.
But I'm enjoying it, and I'm kind of getting the balance now. And then, you know, having that bit of stability for the first time in a while of like a monthly paycheck, and then I can use that to put towards advertising my businesses, or, you know, just getting more materials and things like that. So yeah, it's working out really well.
And it gives you time as well to do your artwork and
and getting the balance. I'm doing kind of evenings and weekends and holiday days whenever I can is then towards the business as well.
And you're displaying one piece of work there. So that's great, Sophie, and it's been a pleasure working with you and helping you and being the sounding board.
Yeah, no, I really appreciated our calls every month and the check-ins, and just you've always been so supportive and encouraging, and I didn't feel like I was being pushed to do like something that's not me or anything, you know. That I felt like you were very understanding of my work as an artist, and, you know, I was like, I'm doing all these things, it's just, you know, I'm trying to figure it all out. And it was lovely to have those calls with you and just feel like you were always really like supportive and encouraging, so it really did help a lot.
Thanks, yeah. And thanks and good luck with everything.
Thank you so much.
No bother.
Thank you.
So thank you, Sophie and Katrina, and best of luck in the future. And thanks for nice chat. Our next item on the agenda is Joan McNaboe. Joan is the manager of the Skills and Labour Market Research Unit in Solis. The SLMRU provides a data gathering, analytical and research resource on the supply and demand of skills in Ireland. The unit's output supports the work of government departments, agencies and education and training providers. Joan has been involved in the production of numerous reports within the unit over the years, including the National Skills Bulletin, Monitoring Ireland's Skills Supply, and the Vacancy Overview Report. Thank you, Joan, and good morning.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks to the Cork City Partnership for having me here. Let me see if I can share my screen. Now, I hope you can see the slides there. Please shout if you can't.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to be the opposite of Sophie and be very data-driven, data-heavy. So just to warn you on that. I'm going to look at kind of what the employment situation looks like post-COVID and some of the challenges and opportunities. I'm going to look generally at the labour market, and this has been mentioned already a good few times this morning. So just to put in context, looking at the difference by sector and occupation. I'm going to touch on the Southwest labour force. I'm then going to focus in on a report that we produced earlier on this year, looking at those with lower and mid-lower skilled occupations, and I'll explain that in more detail. And then I'll just finish up on some of the challenges and job opportunities. So this has been mentioned, I think Paul mentioned it and Adele mentioned it, just in terms of just recent timelines. So back in the end of 2019, we had 2.36 million people employed in Ireland. Obviously, COVID hit then, and the restrictions began in March 2020. By the second quarter of 2020, employment had fallen to 2.14 million, and that's actually an underestimation. That's the unadjusted figure, because we know at this point there was over 600,000 people on pandemic unemployment payment. So it was a huge fall in employment in Ireland. We then entered into this kind of period of reopenings and then further lockdowns. But by the end of 2021, we actually had 2.5 million people employed. So it was more than pre-COVID. What you see though is that it wasn't across sectors. So there were some sectors, including, you can see here, the ICT sector in this period between the second quarter of 2019 to the second quarter of 2022, increased by 40% over the time. There was increases in the likes of education. Professional activities would include the likes of, say, accountants, architects would be all in those sort of legal professions in there. And then you see, though, as you move down at the other end, there was some occupations that still haven't recovered to pre-COVID employment levels. So the first one here you see is administrative and support. Now, this isn't admin roles, this is administrative support to offices, say. So the fall really relates primarily to security officers and cleaners. We can see that accommodation and food still hasn't recovered. We know there's been significant rehiring in this area, but the overall levels still haven't come back to the pre-COVID levels. And this kind of other group would include the likes of arts and entertainment, sports, and we know the impact that COVID has had on those sectors. And if we look at it by occupation, so you can see first that the blue line here is just since the kind of end of 2020 to the end of 2021, you can see for most occupations, there was growth in employment. You can see here professional roles. So again, this is professional occupations. So this includes teachers, nurses, accountants, ICT professionals. So they grew quite strongly, as did associate professionals. The biggest growth here was for these elementary occupations, primarily related to hospitality workers, so the likes of waiters, bar staff, kitchen assistants, and operatives. So this would include people working in manufacturing, but also the likes of drivers. But if we actually compare it to pre-COVID levels, you can see for some there was growth for the two periods, but for others, so this skilled trades would include both chefs and construction trades. So they're 7% lower than they were pre-COVID. For sales occupations, this would most likely be retail sales assistants would be in here, so they haven't fully recovered. The caring and personal services, so that includes childcare workers, hairdressers, and care workers in the health sector. And you can see here, sorry, again, that the elementary employment still hasn't, despite huge increases in employment change in the most recent year, they still haven't recovered to pre-COVID levels. If we focus in just on the Southwest region, so apologies, employment data is only available for the Southwest region. It doesn't divide Cork and Kerry. So apologies if I'm causing offence there. We produce a regional infographic each year. This is just a screen grab of the front page. They're just a 2 or 3 page document, so it gives you kind of a snapshot of what's happening in the region. And I've just included the link here at the bottom. We're going to be starting to work on our next one. So this was the one we produced earlier on this year, and we'll have a new one hopefully by next January. If we look at just the latest of the Q2 figures, the Southwest region had 366,000 people employed, an increase of 47,000 people since quarter 2, 2019. The unemployment rate stood at 4.9%, so this has fallen since the kind of height of COVID, and a 65.2% participation rate. So this has gone up. So these are the people who are either employed or unemployed. So it's not, it means that there's more people active in the labour force. So it's a positive sign there. If we look at the live register for the Southwest, and this is based on August 2022. So in the Southwest region, we have 24,000 people on the live register. You can see here that those within that have been, the duration is a year or less, account for 70%. Under 3 months is 39%. You can see the spread across the ages. kind of veering towards the younger age group, more females, 53%, and job seekers allowance accounting for 58%. But if we actually just focus here just on those who are a year plus, so we've 7,000 here, you can see that the age spread is older than the full set. You can see here as well that it's more likely to be males, 54% males. And job seeker allowance now accounts for 71% of people on the live register. So what I'm going to focus in on now is this report that we produced earlier on this year about better aligning existing skills levels with Ireland's labour market needs. So the occupations are grouped. Now these levels are already predefined internationally. And you can, I know there's a lot of people who have an upset when they're talking about low level skills, but we're only talking about here, and this, as I said, is not defined by us. It's the occupation and it's the level of skill required to do a job. So most of these in the high skilled, a third level qualification would primarily be required. So for the likes of nurses and engineers, they're most likely needed as well for the likes of graphic designers, electricians, carpenters would have all the trade. So when we're talking about these, we're not saying that the people in the occupations have a particular level of skill. It's just what is required for the skills. So what we're going to focus on here just in the next few slides is this level 1 and level 2. So it covers administrative occupations, secretarial, caring. So you can see some of the examples of the occupations here. I just thought it'd be good to just focus in on these to get more of an insight into what's happening. If we look at the total number in employment, you can see that combined this mid-lower category has 828,000 people employed, and the lower skilled category has 258,000, another 10%. So between them, they account for 44% of employment in Ireland. And if we look at just these lower and mid-lower combined, we're just looking at what the level of education requirement is. So you can see there's a lot in these kind of elementary operatives and sales who have either a junior cert or a leaving cert equivalent. As I said, this isn't about what level of skill the actual people have. You can see across all of these that there are people with third level qualifications. Now, some in these will be students, particularly in the likes of kind of hospitality occupations or in sales assistants, but it just shows you that there is breadth here for some of the clients that you maybe deal with who maybe have a lower level of education, that there is plenty of job opportunities. These are the number of people employed across Ireland in these occupations. So you can see that there is potential opportunities for people with lower levels of qualifications. And obviously, once we get them into employment, if we can upskill them and move them up through career pathways. And again, just to show you, if we're just looking at it by sector, again, you can see those with NFQ levels 1 to 3 and levels 4 to 8. So you can see again a significant share in the retail, 33,000 with NFQ level 1 to 3, and another nearly 100,000 here up to level 5. And again, in accommodation food, there's quite a large share, and again in industry. So just to give you a sense of where some people are employed, there's obviously people with lower levels of qualifications in those mid-higher and higher occupations, but I just thought we'd focus on these at the moment. In terms of the impact of COVID for these occupations, this is just looking, the report looked at the change from Q3 2019 to Q3 2021. So there's an increase of 145,000 people. What you can see is most of the increase in employment was for those in the mid-higher and higher occupations. For those in the lower, there was actually no change in employment over the period. And the mid-lower, there was 19,000, which represented a 2% increase. So most of the increase is for those higher level skills. But what I would say as well, which I'll touch on later, is that there is an awful lot of job churn in these occupations. So there's still a significant amount of job opportunities occurring. So if we move on to where are the challenges and opportunities. So again, as I mentioned, you can see here just over the few years, there's been a huge increase in the number of job hires across sectors, particularly for the likes of wholesale and retail and accommodation and food. So even though they haven't necessarily, the accommodation and food hasn't recovered its employment numbers, there's still a significant amount of rehiring occurring. You can also see this across health, manufacturing, professional activities, construction, and the IT sector. I just wanted to give you an example. This is just a snapshot of the DSP Jobs Ireland vacancies in 2021. So we wouldn't say that these are representative of all vacancies in Ireland. Online vacancies tend to be for high skilled occupations. But I thought it'd be useful for you to see just some of the kind of the occupations that are coming through the DSP Jobs Ireland. A huge share being meat processing operatives. So I think there's a lot of kind of job churn going on in these occupations, and it may relate somewhat to employment permits that they need to advertise through Jobs Ireland for employment permits. You can see also HGV drivers. The writing is very small, but there's production general operatives there and other operatives. Within the elementary, horticultural operatives, particularly for mushroom pickers, cleaners, warehouse operatives, kitchen assistants, waiting staff, security. For the skilled trades, you can see the chefs account for quite a significant share here. And then there would be a good few in the construction, so carpenters, plasterers, etc., glaziers. There's welders and CNC operatives, if you can read that small writing there. Sales assistants and stock takers, customer service reps, as we'd Sophie on there earlier talking about her customer service. The census enumerators, which is obviously only happens every 5 to 6 years, and some employment in the civil service for temporary clerical officers. For personal services, again, healthcare assistants and care workers featuring strongly. Again, if your eyesight is good enough, these are hairdressers, there's early years and other personal services. Professional and associates, you can see these are much smaller for DSP. But hopefully that gives you a little sense of some of the occupations, the job titles that are coming up frequently. Yeah. So we've just released our National Skills Bulletin just in the last week, and we've identified skills shortages across a number of areas. So I've just highlighted them here. Now, I'm not going to dwell on them. They're nearly all high skilled occupations. Now, there is issues in terms of the likes of care workers. Some of the construction trades are showing up as being potentially skills shortages, chefs and drivers, particularly HGV drivers. But they're all available in our National Skills Bulletin. In terms of future demand for skills, I just wanted to touch on a few. Construction being one, particularly with the housing targets. And again, the next point in terms of the green economy, there will be a lot of job opportunities as relation to climate targets for the likes of retrofitting, but then also other areas like energy and electric vehicles. Healthcare, we are going to see a significant need for people in the healthcare system in future years. We have an aging population. There's the staunch of care, there's a real look on how to bring that out to the community. So the need for more kind of care workers, etc. And then obviously in some of the high skill roles in ICT, professional and financial activities. Just one thing though to note is in terms of the lifelong learning rates, you can see here, this is a report we produced earlier. You can see the faults, the older you are, the less likely you are to engage in lifelong learning. And again, the lower your level of education, the less likely you are to engage in lifelong learning. So that's producing certainly a challenge for people to bring them along in the labour market. So that's the first of the challenges. So obviously the external factors going on in the economy in terms of future skills needs. So, there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of the inflation, supply chain, particularly for the likes of food and for construction. Brexit continues to loom, and obviously the housing availability is causing issues in terms of employment. Supply of skills, Adele mentioned as well about the tightening of the labour market. And we need to ensure that we have a supply of skills across the labour market to meet the demands for employers. But we also need to ensure that people have the right skills, because as I mentioned earlier, most of the growth in employment is going to be in those kind of high skilled areas, but also the churn in some of the other occupations, to make sure that we have the people who can fit into these occupations. So digital skills was mentioned a few times over it. This is key in terms of getting people started on the learning path to ensure, because we have moved into this environment where there's a higher demand for digital skills, particularly since COVID. And attractiveness of the job is a huge thing. And you can see, I mean, there was talk of teachers this morning, nurses, principals, these all. So there's an attractiveness of the job across all skill levels, but it's particularly acute for the likes of some of the workers like meat processing operatives, cleaners, care workers, and how we can improve the kind of the attractiveness of the job to try and bring people in on these areas. And then just obviously ensuring that no one is left behind, and no one does that better than you guys. Just to finish up, I just wanted to show you, we have a Smart Choice portal. And again, I've given the link here. We have 16 occupational groups. I don't expect you to be able to read any of this, but just if you look on the website, you can click on any of these groups and it will bring you down into more detail as to what is happening. And again, this is reflected in our National Skills Bulletin, so we'll be updating this shortly based on the latest data. And also just some of our, an array of some of our recent reports that might be of interest. One of the reports here, the Shifting Sand, looks at career pathways and what skills to move on, so it might be of interest to you. And I'm happy to share these slides later with you too. Thank you very much. That's me.
Very extensive presentation, and I think, as we all know at this stage, there are many challenges out there now, particularly getting people back into employment. And thank you for the work that you're doing, and I think what we're doing ourselves in Cork City Partnership with the ongoing training and support that we're giving people. So thanks for that. Questions maybe later on again in the Q&A, which will follow our next item, which is a video clip. And Brenda,
I'll introduce.
Tell us about that now.
Yep. For our final two video clips, and they're with Tony, our employment enterprise officer. So the first speaker is Tiago, and he's originally from Portugal, and he contacted Cork City Partnership in early 2019 and started trading later that year with support from the STEA scheme. His business provides digital marketing services to SMEs and small business owners. The business slowed down due to COVID, but is now back up and running, and he has got 4 full-time employees, and he is very positive about the future. The second video then is Jonathan Murphy, and he has the gourmet cookery food truck. And he found himself unemployed in 2020, and he contacted CCP for advice and help with starting his business. He took out a loan to fund the purchase of a food truck and has fitted it out to a high standard. And he started trading in October 21, and he saw the opportunity to expand the business. But the big problem he's finding at the moment is to attract staff for his catering business. So we'll just give you a flavour then of, I suppose, the social enterprise self-employment opportunities.
Hello, my name is Tony O'Regan and I'm the Enterprise Officer here at Cork City Partnership. Myself and my colleague Yvonne Quilligan work on the Enterprise Support Team, and both positions are fully funded by the SICAP programme. It's our role to help people who are thinking about self-employment as a career path. We help them explore the whole idea around their business proposal. We give them guidance and advice on setting up a business. And that can involve start your own business training, which we do in conjunction with the local enterprise office. It can be marketing courses for people who need to promote their business to customers, or it can be an explanation around taxation workshops. We also help them make applications to social welfare for the Back to Work Enterprise Allowance Scheme. This is all part and parcel of our role under SICAP. In the last 4 years, some 1,100 people registered with us for SICAP supports. Now, obviously not all of them progressed into self-employment, but people do progress into self-employment, and there's some very, very good stories around it. I would like to introduce you to two of our former clients, to Diego Calavaro and to Jonathan Murphy. Both individuals started from a position of unemployment. They took up the supports through SICAP, which we afforded them, and we helped them to put a business plan together. They were successful in their application for back to work support, and they went on to start their business. But they will explain this to you in fine detail. And the story is quite an interesting story. Diego, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us today. Okay, so you came in here to the partnership. I know that you engaged with us in January of 2019, just after Christmas. You got involved in our enterprise workshop. How did you find your experience dealing with Cork City Partnership and the help and support you got?
I couldn't have done it without you guys. That's the reality. I had a business background. I used to have my company back home, and the things are so different. Then you guys gave me first of all, the push of believing in me in the different country that I don't know no one. And you guys make me believe that it was actually possible. And after that, I learned things that I will never forget, things that I still use nowadays, things that made my life and my basically professional life afloat.
How did you start out, and what's your memory of that area in the business side of it?
Well, first of all, you are in the dark, right? You don't know nothing. You have a great idea, but you don't know how many people will really like it. And it was the biggest challenge when you start to go to people and start to talk about social media, say, I use it, but I have my daughter doing it. So, or I have my cousin or whatever, because social media was not as in demand that is right now. So that whole concept made me realize that I have something there, because no one was talking about. So I say, if I work hard, I can do it. If I keep on the momentum, I need to do it. That's why I had to put all the eggs in the same basket. I didn't have much time. I knew that for some reason that the social media will take off. I knew it. So I had to focus, put my head down, write a lot, with your help, do a nice project, and present it as soon as I could.
And obviously, great enthusiasm, great support, good launching pad, and then you ran into COVID, or we all ran into COVID, the whole world ran into COVID. How did that affect your business?
My business almost died suddenly. But the majority of my clients closed doors, and I was frightened to death. And there was a moment that the resilience kicks in as an entrepreneur. I think we all have it. I think sooner rather than later, the resilience has to be there, the belief that you will make it. The things that I did, I had to reinvent my company. I went from consultancy kind of social media management to a media content creation / social media management, and that brought a lot of attention, dealing with small businesses that needed their name to be out there for the takeaways and stuff. So I focused on that, and it took off. IPE became IPE Media and Marketing Limited, and then was smooth sailing.
So you actually incorporated the company, became a limited company during that journey, as we started to come out of COVID. What about further ambitions, things like employing staff? I noticed that you had mentioned it, or we had discussed it at some point. Has that materialized? Have you taken on staff?
Very proudly. We are 4 right now in the company, and very creatives. I'm the only one that works in the different side of the brain, but the other ones are creatives, are mindsets that only I don't even know how to explain. So they want different things. And the funny thing is, they are full-time employees. I'm proudly giving them the full-time, and obviously I'm always looking to extend and build from there. But one of the things that is more interesting, this always was my focus and my key element. If I'm eating, everyone is eating.
Jonathan, hello and welcome, and thank you very much for coming along. This is a very informal chat, and hopefully we can understand your story and we can tease it out.
Perfect.
You availed of the enterprise supports available from Cork City Partnership back in 2020, early 2020. But prior to that, what's your own background, or what's your own story?
Well, I was working for an IT distribution company for 14 years. in sales. And the passion was always cooking. So I felt that there was kind of not much more growth for me in the company.
The timing was very good in that respect, and like the support that you got from the Department of Social Protection was very useful to you, obviously.
Absolutely.
And everybody else. But COVID slowed the whole project down.
It did.
Yeah. And then, if I can remember correctly, the first year of the lockdown was an absolute and definite lockdown. But there was a bit of movement as we went into the second part of the year.
Yeah.
Into the second year, sorry. During that time, did you complete a Start Your Own Business course, or?
I did, and it was absolutely super.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what? I just, the guys were lovely. Interacting with people as well online, because we kind of took the COVID very serious. We weren't going out. You know, if I went down to do the shopping, I'd leave the shoes outside the door and all that. So we weren't seeing the
very
family.
Cautious.
We weren't seeing the friends. So to interact with people online, I thought the course was fantastic.
So this was a Start Your Own Business course that you were able to network with other participants on the course.
Yes.
And did you get anything back from your engagement with the other participants? Was it helpful to you in terms of the business building?
It was. There was a couple of parts of it that I really liked. The tax part, which is the boring part, but I found it very good. The way they were explaining small things now, but stuck out and really helped me now was keep on top of your books every week.
Mm-hmm. So to keep your records up to date and current and so on and so forth.
At the end of every week on a Monday, I just scan the diesel receipts and scan the invoices, and I put them into a folder, and they're ready to be sent off them when the VAT is due. You know.
Very good. So obviously the business now has developed, and have you actually got to the stage where you're employing people, or are you just all one man band, or what's the background?
No, well, it's trying to get staff at the minute is tough, very tough.
I understand you've part-time staff working with you on a part-time basis, a kind of a flexi basis at the moment.
And we have kind of one floating as well, that if we have a big function, they'll pop in and help us.
And are you saying that you're being restricted because there's not enough staff available to you at the moment for that particular industry?
Absolutely. It seems impossible to get staff.
Well, perhaps it's just that there's a lot of opportunities there. I'm not saying that that's the solution to it, but at least you're highlighting it and you've got first-hand experience of it.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much to Tiago and Jonathan, and we wish them very well going forward. Obviously, they're doing pretty well at the minute, so things are looking good for them. And also to Tony and the team in Cork City Partnership. I've known over the years the fantastic work that they've done in putting people, setting up businesses all over the city, and indeed the county, many successful business, and they've done great work. So, guys, on behalf of us all, thanks very much for what you do. Our next item on the agenda, and we now come to the panel discussion, and I'm delighted to welcome Adrian Rogers. Adrian, who will chair our panel discussion, is the Director of Community Culture and Placemaking with Cork City Council, and works closely with us through the LCDC in the delivery of the SICAP programme in the city. So Adrian will have with her on the panel Dr. Adele Whelan, Joan McNamara and Sophie Crosby, and Adrian will act as chair, and she will also close the meeting when the discussion is finished. So just for myself and Brenda to thank everybody, and to let people know that the webinar will be available, and documentation that was put up on site this morning will be available to participants as well. So Adrian, I'll hand you over to you now. You see there. Adrian, can you hear me?
She may have frozen there.
Oh. She's frozen? Oh, she's frozen. Well, maybe we could start with.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions here already, Adrian. So if we want to, maybe Brenda, you could put them out there.
Yeah, I will, of course. I'll just have a quick look here. So, just from Roisin, so thanks to Sophie Crosby for an excellent presentation. In relation to what companies have experienced over the last 2 years and current recruitment needs, are there examples of companies who give opportunities to long-term unemployed people who need to get a work start and build up experience? That's a good question.
So,
And Brenda, apologies, I just dropped off. I've been on all morning, and the minute I was coming in, it just, I mean, you couldn't make it up.
I'm a good sub.
You're back on our way, so we can hand over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Brendan. Apologies for that.
Okay.
So look, firstly, I suppose I was making loads of notes while you were all making your presentations, and there's absolutely fabulous stuff there. I mean, you got an awful lot of data and information into those presentations, and I'd be looking forward to kind of reviewing them in my own time, because I think there's a lot of stuff there to be absorbed. Just, I know there's a lot of questions in the Q&A, so before we go to that, I just want to get a question across from myself, which is kind of really aimed at all of you. And as you were going through your presentations, I suppose something that kind of sprang to my mind on 2 or 3 occasions was, you know, that saying, do what you love and love what you do. And then I suppose as I was looking, like Joan, your presentation is about, I suppose, identifying where the gaps are for skills that are required for, I suppose, our nation or country, employers. But then are we trying to fit people into, you know, a box that maybe won't work for them? And then, you know, you heard Sophie's story about how, I mean, she's an artist, she has a talent, but then she had to move into something else because she actually couldn't do what she was. And we need that, we need the artistic talent. So I suppose I might start with you, Joan, and then move to you, Sophie, and Adele. Like, what are your thoughts around that? Is it something that, is it a conflict that we have? How do we create a balance on that?
Great to be the first person to start on this. And well, I mean, from our point of view, we're very much, as you mentioned, Adrian, we're very much from that point of finding where the skills and the match up. So yes, we absolutely need more of the artistic, but from an employer's point of view, where they're going to provide jobs, we need to ensure that we have the skills. I mean, it comes back to that whole thing in terms of your level of education, what you train as. But I think what's really coming across now is that we have this lifelong learning path, that we're not training, you know, we're not all going to university for one thing, you know, that you need to know that your job is going to evolve over the years. And as I said, try and do something that you love. But, you know, it's a lifetime journey now, rather than us squashing everybody into IT skills, because we know that that's where the current jobs are, because I think we need a really good spread across everywhere.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, thanks, Joan. And I suppose, look, I mean, Cork City is UNESCO learning city. So, I mean, we do have a very strong record and reputation for lifelong learning. And I suppose you have pointed out, I suppose, where the challenges are for those people who have lower employment attained, that it's always difficult for them. So I suppose we have to try and find ways to move into that. So Sophie, I suppose from your perspective then, I mean, I was listening to your talk and I was just saying, oh, God help you. I mean, like, it's one thing being an employer having to focus on a sector and your own issues, but IBAC actually has to address the needs of a varied and wide-ranging group and sector of employers. So what do you feel about that, you know, fitting people into blocks? And
yeah, there's some interesting stuff that has come out from our skills folks in the last number of years, and the role of creative thinking and the importance of bands of areas of skills of both life, I think what John O'Halloran calls both the lifelong but also life-wide learning. And I think we need, as an organization, I think we need to kind of learn a bit from our history here as well, which is, on the one hand, you know, there's a need to earn a living and work has to pay, and there's an intrinsic value in work for people that goes beyond just the income that is provided, you know, in terms of people's self-esteem and worth and otherwise. And then there's the self-actualization part of it, which is that people who are happy and fulfilled in what they are doing are, you know, naturally going to be more successful in the job that they're doing. So it's, how do you get that balance right? And, you know, I think we've become a very wealthy society in the last 10, 15 years. And I think we need to have a little bit of glibness as well at the same time, and remember some of our lessons of our history as well, in terms of ensuring that we continue to, I suppose, value the role that work plays for people, not just in terms of, you know, the income benefit aspect of it, but in terms of the the overall human aspect of it as well. So it's to get that balance right, I think, is challenging.
Thanks, Sophie. And yeah, you're right. I mean, a couple of times as well during your presentations, like that personal development piece, I think was coming across from nearly everybody, really. You know, I think we all do recognize that and we should treasure it, you know. So Adele, your views and thoughts?
Yes, Adriana, I suppose there is an underlying assumption that people know what they want to do there. And I think there is this guidance piece from my research and actually interviewing the individuals was they weren't actually sure where their skills were at, where their do what you love, even finding that within the labor market. So for me, there's a few steps. The first is engagement. Okay, so you need to have the engagement, then education, then experience and exposure. So it builds, and working through those 4 stages really builds confidence and motivation. And what we found through the evaluation of the SciCap supports is the one-to-one supports allowed people to find that. And we heard it even through many of the examples in the videotape of how they worked through those stages. And it's a long process. For somebody who's very long-term unemployed, that process takes some time. And actually the engagement with an individual over time seems to be what knitted that together successfully.
Thanks, Adele. And I suppose just when you were making your presentation, you had mentioned that one-to-one and the targeted approach. Do you know of any kind of examples of best practice? Because we obviously know that the one-to-one is, while it's effective, it's costly. You know, it's very difficult to kind of scale it up where you need it. So are there any examples where maybe there are interventions, maybe not digital, based on what Sophie was saying this morning, we need to meet in person as well. But have you seen any examples that could be applied, you know, that we could use?
So I agree that they're expensive, but what I was surprised at was the short nature of them. So it is actually a phone call or a meeting for a short duration. And sometimes the phone calls or during the pandemic, a Zoom call, the durations of them, from what my knowledge of them from the outside in our analysis, was they were quite short and there wasn't that many of them actually for the ones that were really successful. And what we found was a linear relationship with the number of engagements. So if you had one employment support, it was something like 6% more likely to become employed. If there was 2, it jumped to 10. If there was 3, it jumped to 13. So these number of engagements were really, really important. But in fact, the biggest jump was just the first engagement around an employment support. So I think technology can be used. I don't know of a good example of an evaluation because this was the first of its kind within Ireland to look at something like the one-to-one supports or the pre-employment supports to that level. But yes, there are 3 things. Yes, they're expensive, but we need less of them now. We're at 4% unemployment. So there's less people. We're talking about less individuals. And yes, we should get more intensive with these individuals, allowing them more supports. And they, in fact, the nature of them is not the duration or the intensity that some people might think.
That's really useful. Thanks, Adele. And you know, you're right. We probably have an opportunity now with the employment rate at the stage it's at, but also I suppose SciCap and Brenda and the team. I mean, I know that they're well up for doing the one-to-one and the targeted approach. So I'm actually going to go into the chat there now. And Sophie, there's a question for you, which is asking about, given what companies have experienced over the last 2 years and the current recruitment needs, are there examples of companies who give opportunities to long-term unemployed people?
Yeah, I'm just thinking there's probably more qualified people than I to answer that question in terms of specific examples or case studies of working with the long-term unemployed on the ground. But I suppose if I could think about it in terms of channels, where I would see in terms of the channels of engagement of people progressing back into the labour market, I would see for admin roles, the contact centres play a key role in terms of that progression piece. In relation to manufacturing, the employment agencies will play a key role in, because so many of our multinational corporations now do their initial recruitment through temporary roles employed indirectly with their agile workforce that's employed through agencies, whether those, so there's that aspect of it, and many of them have flex up and down depending on their operational needs. And then within healthcare, similarly, the home health care private providers become an active pathway then into the healthcare side of things as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Sophie. And Joan, for you, there's a question there with regards to the role of educational institutions and organisations in facilitating retraining and adaptability.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that the first point is that I think employers need to know what retraining and future skills needs are. So there's a role for like the likes of the regional skills forum managers, Enterprise Ireland or IDA to help them kind of identify that. Then the next piece is the individual actually recognizing that there is a need for retraining, and there's research showing that those with lower levels of skills are actually the least likely to want to engage or recognize that they need to engage. So that's one piece. But I mean, there is a lot out there. The other Sophie in the video mentioned the Springboard Plus course that she did within SOLAS. There's the Skills to Advance. I think there's the Explore program as well with the Regional Skills Force. So that's about, I think, those in manufacturing. So there is work being done. There's an OECD skills strategy being kind of finalized at the moment. I don't know if they're on a road show at the moment, so they may be coming to a venue near you. But, you know, there's an awful lot about that. Again, we were talking about the lifelong learning, but, you know, how to incentivize that. So that should be coming down the road now next year as well.
Great, thanks, John. And I suppose, look, for those of you who maybe don't know me, I'm a Director of Services for Community, Culture and Placemaking. And the previous Lord Mayor actually nicknamed us the Ministry of Fun, because we do, you know, get involved in a lot of things like culture night, and we have events and all that. But I do say to people that fun is hard work. But one thing that I do feel is missing a lot of the time is fun. So, you know, we're all very intense. We're all, you know, driving forward. We never stop to smell the roses and kind of look at what we've actually achieved. But just a general question for each of you, like, do you think that fun is something that's important in people's lives? And I do, but what do you think? Sophie, I'll go to you first.
Oh, thanks. You know, it was funny. I lost my dad a couple of weeks ago, and at the funeral.
Sorry to hear that, Sophie.
No, that's okay. But at the funeral, what I was struck by was how many of his work colleagues over the years came up, and what was so important was the connection with the workplace and the cultural and physical sense of community and fun, because our workplaces are communities, whether they're online or whether they're hybrid. And I think one of the challenges we have now with hybrid working is because we come to the office for short bursts of time, or expectations when we come to the office may be different or met. So it's how do we, without going into the dreaded online Christmas party, nobody wants to repeat that experience, but it is about how do you create that sense of fun. So for example, in IBEC, we experimented this year with the hybrid, last year and this year with the hybrid workplace choir. And I have never laughed so much or had so much crack in a week, right? Because that half an hour in the week when we were all working, you know, whether we were the first year, I think we were on Zoom, we put in a Zoom entry. If we sponsored the international competition, the Choral Festival, and it's growing as a category now. But this year we managed to do, I think this year we had one group of people who were in head office who were able to rehearse in person, and the rest of us Muppets who were trying to join in on Zoom, trying to rehearse. And we managed to have one face-to-face rehearsal, but not everybody was in the room. So our first all in the room face-to-face rehearsal going onto the stage of City Hall was the day of the performance, where we were all stuck in the School of Music beforehand, trying to get it together. But as the crack and the fun, it was brilliant. And what was fabulous about it was it brought people together from all different locations. So we had somebody from Brussels with somebody from Donegal, and it meant that we were able to come together and have the crack. And I think that's really important. And I think sometimes we miss that again.
Great stuff, Sophie, and thanks for sharing. That's brilliant. Adele, I'll go to you for the bit of crack and the bit of fun. What do you do?
Yes, Adrian, I think it's really important. Look, of course, fun can only increase engagement, and engagement is the first step. And then that increases in exposure. It's really, really important for sure. And as you say, it's also costly in terms of time and efforts. And you need to have a lot of people on board for these extra activities and ways and means to actually engage people. But I think that SciCap, even through its work with local communities, groups, local community groups, there's a lot of that happening in that space as well. That's being funded, and it is around culture and arts and fun. Yes.
Good. Thanks, Adele. And I'll hold on to you there, Adele, because there's another question there. So Brenda put it in the chat, and I think it's interesting. There's a constant challenge in engaging with employers as local development companies don't have large numbers of job-ready unemployed people. So any suggestions on how this could be tackled?
Yes, I think this differs at the local level. So it really is a local based approach was what we found was most efficient. Joan already mentions this local skills fora and working with the DSP and jobs fairs, these different mechanisms in order for engaging local employers. But I would also say that engaging one-on-one with employers, so approaching employers, even if they've been approached before, we're in a different landscape now. Times are different. It is worthwhile to re-engage and listen for what it is that the employers want in particular. You can do that in two ways. One is, what jobs are they actually advertising? So on all of the job search websites, you can look at the location based. So whether that's LinkedIn, Indeed, any of these, you can see what are the jobs that are being advertised. And a little bit of analysis around that is probably good. And then I would also say that corporate social responsibility is a growing aspect of large corporations within Ireland, and even small SMEs. And that is important that they play a role. This is giving somebody the opportunity to gain very, very important experience. It doesn't have to be full-time employment in a particularly high-skilled position. It can be much smaller in terms of time, effort, commitment, but it's providing a stepping stone for an individual to engage in worthwhile work for both individuals. And there can be payoffs for both the employer, the employee, and also something like Cork City partnership.
Thanks, Adele. So it's really about like that progression pathway doesn't have to be linear, like it doesn't have to be the same for everybody. We can be flexible and we should be open to that. Thanks for that. Joan, there's a question there also for you, and it relates to the elementary sector. And it's just that I suppose what Brenda's saying is it hasn't fully recovered from COVID. And what do you think that's down to? Is it recruitment challenges rather than a decline in the sector, maybe?
I would say it's both, and particularly now when we see, some of the reasons why some of the hospitality isn't fully recovered, now that with energy prices. So you can see people are just opening, say, 4 days a week rather than or 5 days a week rather than the full 7 days, the number of people employed. There's maybe less people in some of the wholesale retail closing down is reducing. So the number of and less people in the office. So the number of cleaners or security guards is the knock-on effect for that. So these are some of the elementary occupations. So I think it's both, and it's going to be very difficult to know what's going to happen, because these are the type of occupations that are going to be most impacted now. If we are tightening up, it's the services type occupations that will suffer. If people aren't spending as much money, it'll be hospitality and retail that will take the hit on that, I think.
Yeah, thanks, John. And I suppose the big elephant in the room as well is this, the cost of living crisis, which we're facing into now, and impacted by a number of things. Brexit and Ukraine obviously are part of that. I suppose just Sophie, to come to you, what do you think is what is going to be the kind of fix for businesses going forward, having to deal with all of these? I mean, we've gone from crisis to crisis now at this stage,
We have, and I mean, you know, we're seeing, if you look at some of the increases that are planned and say leave arrangements and things, there's a lot of hidden costs in the legislative agenda that are creeping in, that are starting to stir up quite a lot of large employers over the next 12 months. So we have to be really careful as an economy that we don't lose competitiveness, particularly when you see the skills shortages and the inflationary pressures, because at the end of the day, we are an island at the edge of Europe, you know. So we do have increased transport costs in terms of getting pressures to islands. But I think people, the one thing about the whole hybrid working thing is that people are able to cut their costs a bit better now, in the sense that, you know, you're not driving to the office 5 days a week. You know, there's no point in an employer offering you an allowance for driving to the office, because the revenue will tax the backside out of it anyway, you know, because there's a whole piece around, you know, reform on our travel rates and subsistence rates. It's there in terms of the social welfare reform and tax reform long term as well, that we have to tackle as a society. But in the end of the day, there are schemes that employers are embracing, whether it's the bike to work scheme or the rail commuter pass. And I think for some of our regional cities, especially Cork, big challenge is going to be to get people out of their cars and into public transport and make that cultural shift the way Dublin did a number of years ago. And that's a challenge for all of us. But I've no doubt we'll be up for it, you know, when the pictures, when it's all in. The BIK, for example, now is becoming a cost pressure for organisations, because the changes to the BIK regime for company cars is coming in next year. So that's going to start, all of that is going to drive changes in behaviour for people on the ground. And you know, there's the ups and downs. Do I stay at home and pay to heat my own house? Or do I take a relatively short commute into the office and turn up the heating in the office at my employer's expense?
I know, and it's choices and decisions that need to be made, and it's that agility piece as well. And I suppose something that I was thinking about as well, like, and I'm conscious of the time, so I suppose I'll ask this question. I probably haven't covered everything but I've tried to mix the questions that are in there with what I'm asking. But have any of you considered, you know, going forward, you have so you have the blended worker, the hybrid model, but then you have those workers, mainly frontline workers. They'll never have the opportunity to do that. And I'm just wondering, as kind of society moves forward, and you have some people who are, you know, lucky to be able to, I suppose, be at home a day or two a week. And then there are those people who have to get in their cars or get on their bikes every morning and deal with traffic and weather and all that sort of thing. Any thoughts on maybe what that's going to do to kind of the employment society as we move forward? And I might come to you first, Adele, on that.
Sure, it's a very good question, but it's also a very difficult question to answer, right? Because frontline workers, they are needed on the front line. What I can say is that there is some elements of their jobs that can potentially be done at home. So it might not be that the majority of their job needs to be done on site, but there might be 10, 20% of the job that can be done from home. And where flexibility is permitted in that instance, I think it will be welcomed potentially. So it's not that you have a mix, but it's looking for areas and spaces to allow it where it is possible for a wide range of individuals.
So a bit of an analysis really, and again, that flexibility and the way that we work at. Joan, over to you.
Yeah, we've actually done we've done 2 reports just in the last year or two. Just we looked at the people working from home, and as you said, you know, it does tend to be people with higher levels of skills and higher levels of education, you know, that it's really dominant in.
Benefited,
but yeah, but now there is a benefit in this, you know, that this higher share of women in employment, you know, we're seeing employment for women increasing. And you know, we haven't looked at it in detail, but we can see that the sectors where the growth for females is occurring are also the ones where there's a higher share of people being able to work remotely. So, you know, we haven't looked into causality or anything, but you know, it's interesting. So there is opportunity there for some people that may not in other ways. So it is a benefit, but I mean, you also have to be cognizant there's a lot of people who don't like working remotely. People, you know, and people who choose the likes of kind of healthcare or services generally may be choosing them because they want that personal interaction and may be reluctant to move into that area. There isn't, as Adele said, there isn't that easy fix, but if there is some flexibility that people can work, even one day doing some piece of it, then that's an advantage. But they're going to be the more senior people. You're not going to get a sales assistant or a waiter or any of those being able to do that, unfortunately.
Thanks, John. So then it's over to you, Sophie, because actually it's your group who are going to be the people who have to deal with this and come up with solutions.
Yeah, and I suppose, look, in ways here where there's an advantage in the sense that because there's skill shortages at the moment, employers are being forced to be creative and think about ways of working that previously just wouldn't have been done. And so I think that creates opportunities for flexibility and innovation. I mean, only yesterday I was talking to an employer who was actively looking at allowing a male member of staff take parental leave an hour a week in a production role. You wouldn't have had that conversation 2 years ago. But today it's actively there as part of the drive and skills retention. So I've no doubt that it'll continue, and we'll learn more as we go through the process. But I also know it goes back to this issue of workplaces are collegiate, our communities, and they're collegiate. So, as people realize, are they social creatures or not, and what do they get from the role of work, they'll very quickly decide, are you somebody who prefers to work in a group environment, or are you somebody who prefers to work in a solo environment?
Perfect. Thanks for that, Sophie. So, look, I know we've gone over time, but I just wanted to try and get a few questions in there for everybody. So, firstly, I suppose I just want to thank Adele, Sophie, Joan for your presentations this morning. Like I said, I can't wait to get some time just to sit down and go through them in a bit more detail, just so that I can think about them, and some really insightful things there this morning. I suppose I'm referring back to Paul Geraghty at the start of the morning, and he was asking us, how do we tell the story, or we're not telling the story. But I really thought the videos that we had today, I mean, that's the storytelling, and that's how we tell it, like we can put all the data and all the evidence up in front of people, but it's the people who've actually experienced and gone on a journey that need to tell the story for us all. So I think we need more of that, and I'm sure Brenda and her team will be looking at that. I suppose the other thing that I was thinking throughout the morning as well is that, if anything, over the last couple of years, I think we've all demonstrated real resilience, and that's not just as individuals, but as communities, like as local communities, business communities. I think we've all, and when I said we should stop and smell the roses, I really do think we should all give ourselves a big clap on the back and kind of say, we have done amazing work over the last 3 years with all the challenges that we have. And I actually think, because of what we've gone through with COVID, I think the Ukrainian piece, we've all just pivoted into kind of dealing with the next crisis, so we don't want to be doing that forever, but I suppose we'll do it for as long as we have to. But I think we're in a good position to kind of manage that. So look, I also just want to thank Mick O'Connell, Chair of Cork City Partnership, Brenda Cahill and her team for all the fantastic work that you're doing. And with that, I might just close off the session and wish you all a nice day. Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.